Good evening to all of you. Welcome, especially for all students who are going to do study tours to South Korea, Japan. Who is going to travel for yeah, wow, that's quite a lot. You might be of Daedalus, study tour Kaizen, Exploratia. There are different tours all going to that region. So I think it will be a very interesting topic for you this evening, since North Korea is nearby, of course. I'm very happy that Professor Remco Breuker is our guest this evening. Remco Breuker is a professor of Korean Studies at the Leiden Asia Center at the University of Leiden. In the Netherlands, he is the expert on North Korea. You can see him on television, hear him on the radio, read in several newspapers his articles. Very recently he published a report about the forced labor of North Korean people in, for instance, the EU, where people were forced to work on shipyards, for instance. And in that article he described, in the report he described North Korea as the world's largest illegal employment agency. Well, that's already some food for thought, I think. What to think of the smiling, happy North Korean cheerleaders at the Olympic Winter Games? You all have seen it. What's behind this artificial facade of happiness? That's now this evening, Professor Breuker will shed light on one of the most enigmatic and misinterpreted countries of the world, the DPRK, the Democratic People's Republic Korea. Professor Breuker will speak for about 1 hour, then we have half an hour for Q&As. So, warm welcome for Professor Breuker. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having invited me to speak here today. Thank you also for the very kind introduction. I'm going to take about an hour of your time to discuss the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, which is probably the country with the worst name in the world, because it's not democratic. The people have nothing to say. It's not a republic, and it's not even the entirety of Korea. So basically, what I'll try to do here, and it's just 1 hour, so there's only so much I can do. I will try to give you an idea of what we're looking at. If the DPRK isn't democratic, the people have got nothing to say, it's not a republic, and it's not the entirety of Korea, so what is it then? Does it pose the dangers we think it poses? What should we do? Should we do anything? Or is it just a media hype? That's what I'll talk about. Basically, I'll ask you the question, I'll ask myself the question, who is afraid of North Korea? Limited. Because I think the one thing we tend to forget about Korea, or not really see, is that we're not looking at a state. We're looking perhaps at a company, and not a very nice company at that. As you may know by now, my name is Remco Breuker. I am a Korean studies specialist, and somehow something went wrong in my career, because I wrote my PhD on medieval Korean history. I did graduate school in South Korea, and somehow I ended up being a North Korea expert. I'm not sure what happened there. What I do know is that this seems to be necessary, because I don't think I am exaggerating when I say that North Korea is one of the most pressing problems of the moment. And not just because it threatens to annihilate the United States or South Korea, but because of the human rights situation, which is worse than in most other places of the world, which is saying quite something at this moment. Okay. One more thing. I've noticed that people, in general, refer to me as a doomsayer, somebody who always sees the negative things, who is very pessimistic about North Korea. Actually, I'm not. I'm an optimist with regard to North Korea. The reason is that I think we can do better. North Korea can do better. It can actually change. We don't have to be satisfied with the situation as it is. I may be slightly pessimistic as to what's going on at the moment, but I'll explain that to you through this hour. This is what I would like to talk to you about. North Korea. What is it? What are we talking about? How does it work? And this is extremely important because this is one of the things we always get wrong about North Korea. Where does the money come from? How is it possible that a country that has a GDP that is smaller than most not medium-sized cities, but than most big cities in the world, manages to survive and even to thrive to a certain extent? Because what other country manages to develop nuclear weapons, long-distance missiles, chemical weapons, biological weapons, and then manages to be invited by its neighbor, its foreign enemy with whom it's still at war, South Korea, to participate in the Olympic Winter Games. You need money to make all this happen, and I'll talk about that. Then I'll try and give you a picture of how we should look at North Korea. What is it that we are seeing? What is it that we should pay attention to? What can we believe of the information coming out of North Korea? What can't we believe? And lastly, how to deal with North Korea. To a certain extent, and I never know the proper English for this, but for the Dutch speakers among you, North Korea is a bit like Ver van mijn bedshow. It's something that happens, I don't know, across the globe, 20,000 kilometers from here. Who really cares? That's also what I'd like to talk to you about. It's People for Profit is the title of the report we just put out. Basically arguing that the influence of North Korea is really quite closer than maybe is comfortable for us here. It even reaches the Netherlands. So that's what I'll be talking about. Now, before we start, let me put my watch over here, otherwise I'll keep you here until 12 o'clock at least, I think. Once I start talking, apparently my students tell me I don't stop. I don't want to do that to you. So, one thing I would like to ask you to remember is that we're talking about human beings. And somehow this is a message with North Korea you always have to stress, because it's so easy not to see the human side of North Korea. Just to see the marching robots, and when you see the mass choreographed spectacles of the mass games, it's incredible, but you don't see human beings. For me, the only reason now to be seriously involved in research regarding North Korea is the human dimension of it. And when I refer to the human face of North Korea, this is not what I'm talking about. I don't know whether you recognize these people. It's the South Korean president, Moon Jae-in. And I'm not sure why, but this is apparently the North Korea Ivanka Trump. This is the younger sister of the North Korean supreme leader, Kim Jong-Un, who has just concluded her visit to South Korea for the Olympic Games. She's back in Pyongyang now. So this is not the human face I'm talking about. Is there sound? Well, it doesn't really matter. Is this then the human face I'm talking about? The cheerleaders, and everybody is just fell in love with them, it seems. Well, they're human, I will not deny that, but this is not the human face I'm referring to, because what do we see here? Except for, maybe it's a good thing there isn't sound, because this is quite an awful song. The dancing doesn't get any better, but what do we see here? We cheerleaders, right? And they did really well in North Korea. They did South Korea. They did really well in the international press. The human face of North Korea, what you're actually looking at here, is girls who have been selected, usually from an age of 14, who are the most beautiful, usually the most talented, especially musically speaking, intelligent and healthy girls of their generation. Who are drafted into performing such as this, if they're lucky. If they're unlucky, there was also an orchestra visiting South Korea, one of the personal orchestras of the leader. And that's where young, attractive girls like this end up, and they don't have a say in that. These are the girls from that will marry the bodyguards of the Kim family, for example, the diplomats. This is, in other words, a form of forced labor, even of slavery. And it looks really nice, I grant you that, but there's a reason why they picked all these nice girls, nice-looking girls. To illustrate that point is, I don't know whether you've seen the present wife of the leader, Ri Soju. Ever seen her in pictures? Just Google her and you'll see her. She's a singer, pretty. She was a cheerleader 6 years ago, or now 2000. I'm not sure when she was in Seoul. 2014 or maybe before. No, it was before that. She was in Seoul or in Busan during the Asian Games as a cheerleader. So it's and she was drafted into the same kind of system, and basically, which is very reminiscent of the harem system for example, the Ottoman Empire. So this is what you see is not necessarily what you get. The background story to these happy-looking girls is that they really don't have a choice. They have to be there. You can't say no. And that's going to be the main theme of this lecture, I think. You can't say no if you're a North Korean. Okay. So what is the human face? Well, amongst other things, this is. I will not show you the entire clip, just parts of it. And yes, this is well, this should tell you something about the relative poverty of South Korea and North Korea, because the black hole you're seeing, except for Pyongyang, is North Korea. Energy is a problem. And I have to honestly admit that this clip was made by a group of fervent anti-North Korean activists, so it is biased. At the same time, this is not, this footage is real. So what you see is large-scale malnutrition, and a lot of orphans like this who have to fend for themselves on the markets and try to survive. So, next slide. No? But this is something I would really like you to remember. We're talking about human beings, even if they look different. They speak a language that is really different. They eat very different things. They even smell different. Everything is different. At the same time, I mean, it's 2018. It's surprising that we North Koreans again. It's surprising that I still have to mention this, but North Korea it's human. So, and what I would also like to stress here is that despite my very strong criticism of the North Korean state, the criticism is aimed at the state, at the regime, at the structure, not at the people. Before we continue, I'd like to ask you a question. What is North Korea as a state? Is it a communist state? Socialist? I'm sure Studium Generale will have a nice prize for you if you come up with the right answer. No, but seriously, what do you think it is? Usually, yes? Yes, definitely. Yeah, it's a dictatorship. But there are several flavors of dictatorship, right? So in terms of ideology. Yeah?
It's a communistic dynasty.
Yeah? Well, it's a dynasty, yeah, definitely. And it's it looks communist, right? Look at the poster. Well, maybe it's not communist, maybe it's socialist. So we're not really there yet. That's how it started. That's definitely true. North Korea started as a socialist experiment. But somewhere along the way, things went wrong. And it didn't quite develop the way like Eastern European states developed into socialism and then into what they are now. In the 90s, North Korea didn't collapse, but instead it experienced a horrendous famine in which we don't know how many people, but 1 to 3 million people probably died, out of a population of 22 million at that moment. But that's a fairly large percentage of people dying. That's up to 10-15%. If North Korea had been socialist until then, but a dictatorship, it wasn't anymore afterwards. it became capitalist. And this is going to sound a bit strange, but is nonetheless true. Because what happens? What is the one legitimation for a socialist or communist state? What does it do that makes it, that gives it its reason to exist? It takes care of its people, right? That's the one thing that a socialist state is supposed to do. Whatever else it does, it has to take care of its people. It has to give them food. It has to give them a house, work, everything. And that's what North Korea used to do. Granted, I mean, this wasn't the richest country in the world, but at the same time, it did take care of its people. People didn't die of hunger, but this all changed in the 90s. I won't go into the reasons of the famine. Suffice it to say that there was a famine and lots of people died. And afterwards, the one thing that legitimized the North Korean state in the eyes of its own people, the public distribution system, which would make sure that each week or each month you'd have so many kilos of rice, so many kilos of meat, so many kilos of vegetables, things like that, so many eggs, was gone. It still exists, but it only exists for the elite. That's a very small percentage of the population. Those who survived the famine found out that they'd better take care of themselves. So what do? If the state can't take care of you, take care of yourself. You start to breed rabbits and you sell those rabbits you don't eat yourself. You keep chicken and you sell the eggs, things like that. A very simple form of capitalism, if you will. And that's how North Korea functions at a very broad societal level today. There are black markets that are permitted by the government, but not run by the government, and that's how people stay alive. So it's, in a sense, it's capitalism. And there's something else, and I'll get to that later also, but it's not just the people themselves who have turned from a socialist way of life because they had to survive to a more capitalist way of life. If you look at the elite, if you look at the people who keep the dynasty alive, because this is a dynasty, we're into the third ruler now. These are also people who have to do. Now let me phrase this in, as a question to you. What do you think you have to do to become, to get a special medal of honor from the North Korean state? There are rules for that. You have to earn money. You have to earn the state $1 million, $10 million. And if you do, they'll give you a medal. You're a people's hero. First rank, second rank, and all kinds of different medals you can get. Recognition in exchange for earning the state money. And that's how North Korea works today. So it looks socialist. I grant you that. I mean, it looks very familiar if you've been to East Germany, for example, or Poland in the 80s or before. It is everything but socialist. It's capitalist, through and through. And let me tell you, to illustrate the point, the tale of the pork processing plant. Now that I look at it, it seems a bit of a weird title I've chosen, but this summer I spent most of the summer in South Korea, where we interviewed North Koreans, refugees, people who left North Korea recently, and asked them about their experiences. What is it like, and particularly with regard to work. So what kind of work did you do? How did you get that job? How did you keep that job? What does it mean to work? Did you get paid? And as it turns out, most people didn't get paid. So you'd expect them to get something else, food, but most people didn't get food either because, as I said before, there is no public distribution system anymore. So how do you survive? And what we found was not something unknown, but this tale of the pork processing plant captures everything. Now, it's a bit of a long story, but bear with me. This used to be a socialist state, which means that every citizen should contribute, if you're not either too young or too old or sick. So if you don't have a job, it's actually illegal. If you're an able-bodied person, male or female, unmarried female or married male or married or unmarried male, doesn't matter, you have to work. If you don't have a job, the unemployment police can arrest you and put you in a labor camp. And trust me, that's one place you don't want to be put in North Korea. You don't want to go to a labor camp. So you need to have a job. Now, there was this woman who had worked at a pork processing plant, which is, I imagine, a big farm where they had thousands of pigs, which they would raise and then slaughter and send the meat to the army, because they were part of the army supply chain. Then the famine came, and this was a really bad famine. You can imagine what happened to the pigs, right? No? Famine, lots of pigs. What do you think will happen to the pigs? They get eaten, right? And you don't. And if you're hungry enough, if your family's hungry enough, you're not going to be able to not eat all the pigs. You're not going to leave some pigs behind. You're going to eat everything you need to eat in order to survive. So after the famine, she still works at the pork processing plant because she needs to have a job, like everyone else. But there are no pigs anymore. So what do? You do something else. And what she did, she started trading with China. She lived in the north, and the Chinese border was maybe 10, 15 kilometers away. So every month or so she would go to China, buy things, take them to North Korea and sell those. And that's how she would make a living. And in this way she could provide for the people around her. But so why the pork processing plant? So you quit your job, right? You can't quit your job. You need a job. So in order for her not to be arrested by the unemployment police, she needed to stay on the payroll of the pork processing plant. In order to stay on the payroll, she needed to pay her previous employer more than the salary she had ever earned. And this is the thing that this is really ironic. She had to bring them each month 2 to 5 kilos of pork, of meat. Why? Because this pork processing plant still had to supply the army, but they didn't have pigs anymore. So they rely on their workers, their previous workers who need the registration, to be there and to pay them and to supply them with the food, with the stuff they needed. And this is something we found in all kinds of variations with basically everybody we talked to. This is how really a formerly socialist system got completely inverted into a kind of, I'm not sure whether it is even capitalism, but that's probably the closest description I can think of. Now, who benefits from this and how? And this is the important thing about North Korea we usually don't get, is that this way you have a large population of probably somewhere between 23 to 25 million. Nobody really knows. I wonder whether North Korean government itself knows how many people it has. But these are the people who work, who have 2 jobs, one official job, one unofficial job, and they pay informal taxes over this. And the informal taxes go into the party system. And I'll explain that to you, I think now, how things work. Now, this, don't be daunted by the graphics, because they are a bit complicated. Well, not this one. But this is, you probably recognize this gentleman, now deceased, Kim Jong-il. So the second of the Kims. He died in 2011. He is the person who set up this system. And this is what he did. Because if you look, and seriously, I just put this up here to give you some idea how this works. I will not give you a class in institutional history. When North Korea was founded, it was founded as a socialist state in which you had a leader who was a dictator who had much power, but he wasn't the only one. There were different competing factions, like you'd have in Soviet Russia, like you'd have in Bulgaria, Romania, Czechoslovakia. And the dictator, the leader, the supreme leader, really had to make sure that everybody would be satisfied. So the military, the people in charge of the economy, the people in charge of ideology, he had to make sure that everything was kind of balanced. And yes, his voice was loudest, but his wasn't the only voice. And if everybody would band together and say, we don't want you anymore, it would be the end for him. This is how it was under Kim Il-sung, the founder of the country. But then his son came to power. Interestingly, he never was meant to come to power because he never was meant to be the heir. There's another son who was apparently much nicer, much more charismatic, much better at dealing with people, well, face to face at least. But Kim Jong-il managed to make sure that his half-brother was ousted from power. He's now in Czech Republic. He's the North Korean ambassador. He was was banished from his, well, not officially, but he had to leave North Korea in the 80s and was made ambassador to Poland and is now ambassador to the Czech Republic. And as rumor has it, he's never been back to North Korea. Apparently he resembles his father too much. Anyway, let's go there. But what you see here is that Kim Jong-il managed to do something really quite different, and so lots of acronyms here. Korean Workers' Party Propagation and Agitation Department, Korean Workers' Party Organization and Guidance Department. I'll get back to this. What Kim Jong-il did basically is concentrate all power in these two party departments. And the Propagation and Agitation Department, that's now ruled or run by the sister of Kim Jong-un, the woman we saw in the beginning, who just returned. Let me skip this for the moment and show you what happened. What happened is that Kim Jong-il took over power from his father, and this is going to sound contradictory, but it worked, by making his father the supreme leader and the only person who ever mattered. He took into his hands propaganda and myth making. So if you read, for example, North Korean literature from the 60s, you'll find that Kim Il-sung is a hugely talented man, but he's a man, he's a human being. In the 70s, he becomes this transcendental being. In the 80s, he's a complete god. He's no longer human. And that's, and I wonder, well, this is only in English the case, it's not in Korean, but, and this is the department that basically rules North Korea, the OGD, anagram for God. Because this is what Kim Jong-il managed to do. Bit by bit, he took away the power from his father. His father was getting older, so he said, well, you know, my father's getting older, he can't read everything you send him through the bureaucracy. Why don't you tape everything? Because his hearing is still okay. I'll listen to the tapes and give him the tapes. Of course, this meant that Kim Jong-il and his people started to function as gatekeepers. Nothing they didn't want his father to hear got to him. So they could sift through everything. And they came up with what it's a mouthful, the monolithic leadership system, which means that there's only one thing that matters in North Korea, and that's the leader. Now, if you, I don't know, anyone of you, maybe if you've ever read the North Korean Constitution. I guess you haven't. How do you think the people, the North Korean people, are described in that constitution? As North Koreans, perhaps? Or as Koreans? No, the Kim Il-sung people, who live in Kim Il-sung land, according to Kim Il-sung-ism. And this is actually quite a thing. So they're not Korean, they're Kim Il-sung-is. They live in Kim Il-sung land, which is Korea. What this OGD did is it created a system in which the only person who mattered was the leader. And of course, and this is still how it functions, because the only person who matters now is Kim Jong-un. Whether he has real power or not doesn't really matter, because this is the legitimation of the system. And that's what the OGD did. Well, you can create anything you want to create, of course, but you have to make sure, if you're a dictator, that people will actually listen to you. And that's, if you look here down at the bottom, physical control, psychological control, that's how it is done in practice. There's physical control, which basically means if you don't do what you're supposed to do, you pay a physical price. You get shot, you get tortured, or you get put in concentration camps. And then there's a psychological control, which is actually much more efficient, because everything you read is about the leader. If you have history in school, it's about the leader and his father and his grandfather. You learn to say general, dear general, which is another way, is a way to address the leader, before you say mom or dad. At least you're supposed to. You must have seen all the badges that North Koreans wear, or supposed to wear. The notion that every North Korean is supposed to have pictures of the leaders, that they clean every day. It's things like this. It's like a religion. Their study temples, their study halls where you can study the writings and the utterances of the leaders. It's just like a religion. And it looks a bit like this. It's fairly, and this is a simplified, condensed map of how everything works. You can ignore it except for one thing, and that's so. This is really how a communist party, also in China or Soviet Russia, would work. But there's one thing that really distinguishes the North Korean system, and that's this: the blue line here, that goes straight up to the top. The Gensec is the general secretary, it's the leader. Right beneath him is the OGD, and it's OGD people who can bypass everything. So everything you see, everything, the system may work like this, but there's always a shortcut, and that's the OGD. And this is how, in practice, in daily life, this system is given shape. It's the party organizational life. It's impossible to translate. No matter how you translate it, you end up with a mouthful. Which basically means all the ideological sessions you have to go through. You have to learn at school, right? But even after school, once you go to your place of work, you need to make sure that you are, ideologically at least, reliable. So, after work, you have the self-criticism sessions, the mutual criticism sessions. Then you have the study hours. Then you have the ideological lectures. You can see it here. All kinds of lectures, and this is the very lowest level and goes all the way up. Now, why this is important is this: if you want to marry, if you want to get a job, if you want to get a house, if you don't want to be taken away to a concentration camp, you need to perform well during these sessions. If you have 3 North Koreans, you have 1 cell. You need only 3 people. 1 cell secretary, 1 cell president, and then 1 ordinary member. And they will criticize themselves, then they'll criticize somebody else. I can imagine that after we leave here, you will have a session in which you criticize yourself, then you criticize me. And let's say I have completely screwed up. I said something which I shouldn't say. You will all start to question me, just like the Cultural Revolution, really, in China. Everything gets written down, and it says Remco Breuker is a complete idiot, and he said things that should never have been said by a lot of loyal citizens of the state. So this gets written down, and it's sent up the bureaucratic chain, together with the reports from places from similar meetings all through North Korea. If it's bad enough, you will stand out, and you will be called again, and then you'll be criticized again. And if it's really bad enough, you'll go all the way up to here, the Central Party all-member meeting, and that's you standing there. And if that's you standing there, chances are you won't survive it. So this system works because there are almost every day you have meetings like this, and they overlap. So let's say you like me, and you decide not to tell anybody how stupid I was by saying something I don't know I shouldn't have said. Chances are in another meeting what I did wrong will come out anyway, and then you will be also guilty because you didn't say that I actually did something wrong. And if and this overlaps maybe 2, 3, 4 times, so most things will come out. And it's a very and this is the system why North Korea still works. And this is why, like you would have in Eastern Germany, the Stasi informers, you don't really need them, because we would be our own informers. Okay. Now, I'd like to, should speed up a little bit. As I told you, North Korea is a capitalist country, and it needs. The thing is, though, it is a capitalist country with an economy that has been run into the ground. As I explained to you, it's a very simplified story, but after the famine, the entire state really, this social system really collapsed, and it didn't really. It wasn't really rebuilt, not like it used to be. But still, I mean, we've all watched the news last year. North Korea with its missiles, and it's doing fairly well. Science is booming in North Korea. Now, I'm going to assume that you all have a technical background. I don't, so I really don't know how expensive it would be to build and test a functioning long distance missile, intercontinental ballistic missile. I can imagine it's fairly expensive. It's not something, even if we would pull all our resources together, we probably wouldn't be able to afford it. So where does the money come from if the country itself doesn't generate it? Well, it can export things. It can export weapons, for example. And this is one of those cases in which the fact that you are basically a Cold War relic from another period that hasn't been able to keep up with other countries is a good thing, because there are more countries like you. So if you are, for example, an African state with Soviet Union weaponry, and you want to kind of, well, you can't really afford to modernize, but you want to make sure your weapons work, you need people who can work with that old-fashioned kind of weaponry. North Korea can, so Russia can't anymore. They've developed. They can't. They don't have the expertise to maintain 6 weapons from the 60s. North Korea can, and it even developed. It even further developed these weapons into something better. So if you are looking for an AK-47 factory, call North Korea. They have their own catalogs for this. Minerals, and this is one of the tragic things about North Korea. North Korea is known to us as one of the most poorest countries in the world. It doesn't need to be, because what's in the ground is probably very similar to what you can find in Congo. It's that rich in terms of minerals, rare earth minerals, coal, although that's on its way out, hopefully. Uranium, gold, silver, everything. Drugs. I don't know, did anybody see Breaking Bad? Crystal meth? It's not easy to produce crystal meth, right? Because it's illegal, and if you don't know what you're doing, before you know it, you'll have blown yourself up. But what if the state does this? That's much easier, right? You can do this in labs like you'd have here, I imagine. You can order all the ingredients you need, no problems. Which is why North Korean crystal meth is apparently the purest crystal meth in the world. Superdollars. North Korea managed at a certain, like about 10 years ago, I think they started noticing in the States that there was this $100 bill that was fake, counterfeit, but it was almost impossible to recognize. Well, to make a very long story short, it was printed in North Korea. The Americans cracked down on it, so now, according to some, North Korea doesn't do it anymore. According to other, more pessimistic minds, they're still doing it, but now they're unrecognizably good. So, I don't know. We'll never prove that one. And then the other thing, what's the one thing that any state will export if it doesn't have anything else? Labor, right? And that's how North Korea at this moment makes much of its money, by exporting labor. Internally, what they do is they tax the people. Well, I wrote down taxes because there's nothing on paper. You don't pay tax in North Korea, but you pay bribes. So if you want to get married, you pay a bribe. So somebody will actually register your marriage. If you want to get a job, you bribe the person who's going to hire you. If you want a promotion, you bribe that person. Bribery is such a well-established phenomenon that everybody really kind of intuitively knows how much he or she should pay in what situation. If you get caught watching South Korean soap operas at home on DVD or USB, which is basically what everybody does, you bribe the people who come and visit you, the state security officers. Which is why these days they don't send an agent from one agency, they send agents from competing agencies, and not two, because you might bribe both of them. They send three. You'll never bribe three agents from three competing agencies, because they'd use it against each other. Anyway, which is why I think if you look at North Korea now, you're not looking at a state, you're looking at a conglomerate of separate but very interconnected companies whose main goal is basically to keep it on existing and to make money. And if you're a North Korean citizen, basically that's what you are. You're an employee. But you are not, but basically your employer is the worst employer in the world. Because the one thing, now let me put it like this. Well, this is University of Twente, so you all have this technical background, right? The three laws that were discovered by Newton, you know them? Yes? No, you do, right? Okay, good. Did you know there's a fourth one? I was told this by a North Korean, former colonel of the military's intelligence service. He told me, well, you know, we discovered the fourth law. And I was like, well, you're now probably going to tell me this ridiculous propaganda story of how Kim Jong-Un was so brilliant that he actually improved upon Newton. And he said, no, it's about conservation of energy and movement and motion and everything. There's a fourth law of the conservation and of motion in North Korea, and it's this: throw money at it and everything will start to move. This is the extent to which money is important in this socialist looking society. Let me again ask you a question. What do you think that makes somebody a member of the elite in North Korea? It used to be the case in the 70s, 60s. You'd be elite if your parents or great-parents, by now great-grandparents, would have fought in the Revolutionary War against the Japanese colonizers. Then you'd be royalty or nobility. If you were politically or ideologically beyond suspicion, then you'd be part of the elite. But now, if you have $100,000 of cash money with you, savings, then you're a member of the elite. It's completely different from how it used to be. Now, we actually did research this. We looked at North Korean forced labor on a global scale. And the outcomes, and we're not the only ones doing this, but were surprising. 1 to 200,000 people across the globe working basically as slaves of the North Korean government. This is an interactive map, but this is a picture. These are the countries where you can find them. Mainly in Russia and in China, 100,000, 120,000 in China probably. Anywhere between 37,000 to 50,000 in Russia. Middle East, Africa, Southeast Asia, European Union. That's where you will find people like this. Mainly working in construction, agriculture, in factories. Why are they not just overseas labor, but forced labor or slave labor? Well, extremely bad working conditions, which you kind of, I guess you can expect. People who come in from abroad usually get the worst jobs, but they have no freedom. They're not supposed to, although they try to do it anyway. They're not supposed to read newspapers, listen to the radio, use the internet, watch TV, things like that. They're not supposed to socialize with the people in the country where they work. You go to work, then you go back home, and you live together in a place that you haven't chosen yourself. The average house that will, in the Netherlands would house, I know, a family of 4 or 5 people, about 40 to 50 North Koreans would live. So you'd share everything. And basically you cannot say no, and that's the most important thing. Can you leave? No, you can't leave. Because if you leave, and you get caught, you have a problem. But more importantly, the people that are being sent abroad are people who have families, who have a wife or a husband, and preferably 2 children. And they are left behind in North Korea. So guess what happens if you leave? They pay the price. Oh, and I almost forgot to say, you don't get paid. Hardly. And in the 60s, this is a very old system, but in the 60s, you would get paid. You'd paid most of your money, of your salary would go to the state, but you'd have enough to go back home after 3 or 5 years and actually make a difference in how your family would live. These days, we spoke to several people, but one person who worked in Poland. So that's the European Union for 14 months before he decided to defect. In those 40 months, he made a grand total of $2,600. I'm a simple humanities scholar, so you do the math. How much he earned in a month. It's not very much. To put it very bluntly, this is a case of human trafficking. Human trafficking is not before we started doing this research. If you would say human trafficking to me, I would think of sex slavery, sexual slavery, prostitution, forced prostitution. In actuality, that is a huge problem. But labor exploitation is much bigger, and it's happening right here. That's one of the things we found in this report. Is that on the ship yards where these people they lived right on the shipyard. Can you imagine? That's both your place of work and your your private residence. They couldn't really leave. They built Dutch ships, which was a bit of a shock, to say the least. Now, this is one of the pictures we took. You see the hard hats there. They have them since 2014. You know why? Because while most of the world didn't really care about what happened to them and their human rights, there was one state that actually did care about their human rights. And ironically, it's North Korea. 2014, a really thick, voluminous report on human rights abuses by the DPRK came out, a UN report. And North Korea is very quick to realize that if we don't pay attention to our people abroad, they will see what we do with them as human rights abusers and will never hear the end of it. And they will just send everybody home. So that's the first time they actually got hard hats and safety shoes with steel toes and things like that. Of course, they needn't have worried, because even after we found out what happened, we still didn't send them home or do anything about it. Anyway, why is this important? Well, one is, I think, as I said before, these are human beings. So there's the issue of the human rights that are being abused. But then there's also security risk. I don't know whether you remember what happened about a year ago, almost to the day, in Kuala Lumpur, on the international airport there. Again, I'm sure the Studium Generale is a nice prize for the person who has the right answer now. What happened? Right. Yeah, the older brother of the leader. Sorry for putting you on the spot all the time with the prices. No, Kim Jong-Un, the heir, once the heir of Kim Jong-il, was killed, and he was killed using VX nerve agent, which is a registered weapon of mass destruction. The thing I will not go into that here, but he was seen as a threat to the present North Korean ruler because he is the older brother, and his mother was of better pedigree than the mother of his half-brother, who's now the leader of North Korea. They never met, by the way. But why is this a security risk, and what on earth does this have to do with the laborers I told you about in Poland? Well, the person, the chemist who put together the nerve agent was supposed to be a simple laborer working on a North Korean laborers, miners visa. The very same kind of visa that the North Koreans get in Poland. He just never reported to work. There was this place he was supposed to go to. He never went there. He did other things. We don't know what, but this is one of the things he did. Now, when I read this, I kind of I didn't feel very well, because We were just finishing our first report on this, and we actually found 4 workers that had never reported to work. So hoping they're not here. I don't know where they are. So there is this security risk. And oh yeah, in Poland, these people, the North Koreans, who are very skilled welders, they worked on NATO ships. Talking about security risk there. And 3 is, of course, nuclear weapons. Where do you think the money goes? Because as I mentioned before, this is a state that is poor to the extent that it can't take care of its own people. It chooses not to take care of its own people. They have to take care of themselves and then pay taxes. And, of course, pork. But the missiles and the nuclear weapons keep coming. They're still being developed. This takes money, not just to do it, because in North Korea, of course, it's cheaper. Labor is cheap there. It's free even. But you need all kinds of parts that you cannot produce yourself. So basically you need to buy them abroad. And for that you need money. So that's where, which is a reason to be very wary about this kind of practice. Now, so what's going on with North Korea at this moment? What does North Korea want? It's not a very nice country. It's not very nice to be born in North Korea at this moment, unless you're a member of the elite. And then I'd say ethically and morally it's not very nice. But really, is it something we should care about? Or just leave it to the bleeding hearts, like perhaps I am, who take pity on people who don't seem to be able to, who can't say no and can't leave? What does the regime want now? Well, to go back to the question in the beginning, who's afraid of North Korea, and should we be afraid? I think you should answer that question yourself, but I can tell you this. What does the regime want? It wants 2 things. It wants the consolidation of the status quo. Because really, North Korea should not have still existed. So much has gone wrong that it would make sense for North Korea to have collapsed at a certain time. And my colleagues have predicted its collapse time and time again, and we've always been wrong. Why? Well, one reason is because we tend to underestimate North Koreans, because they look funny and do funny things. And they march funnily, but really they know what they're doing. The other reason is all the outside pressure keeps North Korea standing. If all the outside pressure would, from China, from Russia, from Japan, from the US, from North Korea would disappear, it would fall like a house of cards, I think. Which means that North Korea needs pressure inside and outside the country. Inside to to tell its own people, really guys, we have to be careful because the Americans are out there. You know what they do? They eat children, and they'll kill your children like they killed your grandparents in the Korean War. So if Trump sends bombers, really big nuclear bombers, over the peninsula, it's great for the North Korean regime, as long as they don't attack, of course. Because they don't have to do anything. They can just shoot pictures and say, look, I told you. We might not be the nicest people, but they are much worse. And they need the pressure from the outside, because as soon as the pressure from the outside is gone, and we would really engage and talk and send people to North Korea, and North Korea would send people to us, which is in normal circumstances is something which I would support, but I don't now. North Korea, the regime would have to give room to these kinds of initiatives. Now, what do you think happens to a regime that has so much blood, that has as much blood on its hands as North Korea, with the concentration camps, with the famine, with all the public executions that are going on, with all the purges? They wouldn't last. They would have to go, and they know they would have to go. Look at China. Any one of you know where the grandchildren of Mao Zedong are? Nobody does, right? And that's the whole point. They're not in power anymore. You would need a shift. And given the amount of blood that has been shed in North Korea, my gut feeling, and that's what every North Korean exile, permanent exile, so people who were members of the elite and left the country say is, the thing we're really afraid of is our own people. Once they get free reign, we're dead. Look at Romania, look at Ceausescu, what happened there. So a consolidation of how things are now. This is the best scenario for North Korea. No war, but also no peace. No relaxation, because that wouldn't give them anything. The other thing they would like to do is to consolidate their possession of nuclear weapons. And this is the one thing which I think I've been gotten a lot of criticism these days, which is fine. No, really, no, I don't like it. It's not fine. For having said that, there is really still this unsolvable problem with North Korea. And everybody says, well, just look at the cheerleaders. Just look at Kim Jong-Un, so the sister, and the 4 high-ranking North Koreans who went to South Korea, which is unimaginable. Everything is fine. There are no problems. They're talking. I don't think so. And even if they would be talking, and chances are they will be talking, even with the United States, you still have the same problem. North Korea has the nuclear weapons with the intercontinental ballistic missiles that can reach the United States mainland, and it will not give them up. Why? Read any writing by the North Korean state and it will become immediately clear. This is their main legitimation. They can't take care of their own people, but they can pretend that they keep them safe. And that's exactly what the nuclear weapons do. Once you give up nuclear weapons, they know what's going to happen. They know what happened to Saddam Hussein, they know what happened to Gaddafi. They'll never give them up. So, no dialogue, I'd say. So the ultimate goal is the continuation of the status quo, but it goes a bit further, and it's something which is unimaginable, or used to be unimaginable, but then again, North Korean participation like this in the Olympic Games was unimaginable 3 months ago. It's the unification of the Korean Peninsula on North Korean terms. Now I don't see that happening anytime soon, but I do think that that is in the end what North Korea really wants, and they're closer to that than they have been for the last 40 or 50 years. South Korea is this government is desperate to bring North Korea back into the fold, to share their wealth to a certain extent, of course. And chances are that North Korea will be able to do something with that. And I don't know, like a confederacy, 2 states, or 1 state, 2 systems, which in itself, you'd have a capitalist system, a socialist system, fine. Except for the fact that this socialist, or this used to be socialist system, is, as a state, probably the worst human rights offender at the moment, and has been for a very long time. But we might see something happening like that. So what to expect now? Probably the presentation of a very normal image, what we have seen in Pyeongchang. So we see the high-ranking North Koreans talking to other leaders, state leaders, heads of state. No problems there. We see cheerleaders. We see a human face. Right? We don't see guns, we don't see missiles, we don't see nuclear bombs. We see normal humans. Sanctions invasions, because this is interesting really. What happened is that those 4 people who visited North Korea were sanctioned by the UN. The sister of Kim Jong-Un is under sanctions by the UN for severe human rights abuses. She can't travel to South Korea. It would be illegal. Yet she ended up in South Korea. She shook hands with the president. What on earth happened there? Of course, there was a temporary lifting of the sanctions in this regard. But this is what's been behind the whole Olympic exercise. North Korea is suffering from the sanctions, and the sanctions put on the DPRK are really pretty severe. It wants to get rid of them. But it doesn't want to do the one thing that would get rid of the sanctions, which is giving up their nuclear weapons. So you try to find another way, and they have, until now, they have cause for celebration, because they, once you start lifting these sanctions, start getting South Korea on your side. And the South Korean Minister of Unification already said, if the sanctions on the DPRK make it difficult for us to talk to North Korea, we will not honor those sanctions, which is against international law. But there you are. What are we going to do? We'll see a continuation of human rights abuses, and probably we'll see military provocations in the near future. on my way here in the train, and I'm from Leiden, so I had plenty of time. I read this interesting statistic that apparently right after Olympic Games, there are more military confrontations than at other times. I don't know whether that's a relevant statistic. Look at the annexation of the Crimea right after Sochi. Right? I'm not sure what will happen here. I'm hoping nothing. I wouldn't put any money on sports diplomacy here to defuse the situation between North and South Korea at the moment. However, okay, I think I probably should be rounding up. So what do we do? Well, keep your eyes on the ball. So do not be distracted by pretty cheerleaders. Also because they're not pretty cheerleaders. Yes, they're pretty, but they're not there because they want to be. They're there because they have to be. Now, we all sometimes have to do things that we don't want to do, but really that's a different category. For them, it's their lives. They don't have a say in what happens. And this is something else. And I was talking to, I can't remember who I was talking to. It must be getting old. I talked to, I think Radio Twente. Is that the right? Enschede FM? Yeah, Enschede FM. Yeah, but I also talked to other journalists. I can't remember who I told this, but you saw the cheerleaders, right? They're young, beautiful women. What do you think will happen to them in a dictatorship that is extremely patriarchal, where men have everything to say? I probably don't need to fill this in for you, right? This is we should know better after right in the middle of the Me Too movement. So, and the other thing we could do, well, basically 3 solutions. Money, second one is money, third one is money. Sanctions, make sure that no money gets into the country. So you slow the development of weapons and stuff like that. Expose the networks that make this possible. And you, I would imagine, have a particular stake in this because one of the reasons why North Korea has nuclear weapons is because of Remco, right? Or this is a story that I cannot refer to here. The Pakistan scientist who worked around here, who took back essential technology that made Pakistan a nuclear power, and then Pakistan traded that knowledge with North Korea for missile technology. And this is something we should fear in the future, because what's to say North Korea won't trade the same knowledge for for money perhaps. Expose the networks that make this possible. Go after the money of the leaders. Invest in the black markets. I haven't been able to talk about that here today, but this is really the most important thing, exiles. This is about, in the end, this is not, North Korea is not my country. I'm not a North Korean. You probably had guessed as much, but it's North Koreans' country. Help them make it into the kind of country they would like to make it in. So you talk to exiles, invest in them, invest in those people, like the woman who worked at the pork processing plant, who crosses the border into China every month, and with her, thousands of North Koreans do that, sometimes even on a daily basis. Give them microcredits, because these black markets where they earn their money, earn their keep, make sure that their families don't die. These are the only places where the state really can't do anything. They have to let it happen. Once they shut that down, everybody is going hungry. There'll be another famine, and I don't think North Koreans will accept another famine. You'd have a kind of revolution. This is really the only counter power to the state. So as the European Union, for example, we should invest in those people. Okay. Oh. I think that's where I want to leave it, because it's 8:30, and I'm looking forward to questions and comments and remarks from you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Remco. While I'm getting the mic, I want to ask you the first question, Remco, if I may be so bold. In the beginning, you said you were optimistic.
Yeah, no, I am.
Could you?
Yeah.
You're extremely optimistic.
Yeah.
Could you comment a little bit more on that? Because the main of your
two things. I think Winston Churchill was right when he said, "Well, I'm optimistic. There's no use being anything else." And the other thing is, I think North Korea can actually change if you talk to enough people outside of the country.
Mm-hmm.
So if you talk to them freely, there's much energy. There's so much hope for a better future.
Okay.
Which is why so many people leave the country. So I think things can actually go better. Well, there's plenty of potential for things to go wrong, but they don't necessarily have to go wrong. So in that sense, I'm an optimist, but also very realistic in the sense that this is a situation with North Korea we haven't encountered before, and it scares the hell out of me, if I'm honest. It's a very scary situation, but there is room for improvement.
Okay. Well, that's good. Good to know. The first question, please go ahead. I think it's on. Yes.
Have you been to North Korea yourself, and if yes, what were your experiences?
I can't go.
You can't go.
No.
Why?
No, that's not true. I could go, but I would have to stay there. I've been told.
You will be imprisoned and
that
captured.
That would be the optimist scenario.
Okay. You will be.
Our research into forced labor basically costs the North Korean state money, and that's the one thing they won't forgive you.
Okay.
So it's they accused me of 3 capital crimes, so I'm not going anytime soon. Having said that, I think if you want to know about North Korea, you have to talk to North Koreans. And the only way to really do that without endangering anybody and really talking to people, of course you have to know Korean then, but the other thing is you have to do it outside of North Korea. It's the only country I think in the world right now where that would go, where not going would actually be the best choice to do research at least.
That's bizarre. Okay, I'll hand the mic over to you. There you go.
In the organization of our study trip, I think I've had a few bad nights of sleep when there was another escalation of between Trump and Kim Jong-Un.
Yeah.
Do you think there's any short-term risk of going to South Korea, at least, for example?
Well, I just came back, so either I'm suicidal or I don't think so. There is a much higher risk now than there has been for a long time. Chances are, no, but I'd still go. I would tell the Dutch embassy I'm going before you, so that if something happens, they know that they should be looking for you. I would ask the embassy for their emergency plans where you should go if things go wrong, definitely. But we're still sending our students, and chances are things will be okay. It pays to be vigilant. It is a risky situation. The fact is that the American army has been quite quietly preparing for what, according to defense analysts, seems to be the possibility of a war in an environment like that of the Korean Peninsula, I think was the quote. It has been concentrating troops in that area, which may just be empty threats, boasting, or not empty threats, but it may be just boasting, putting more pressure on North Korea. The thing is, nobody really knows how far Trump is willing to go. And the scary scenario, well, I don't know, maybe I should I tell you?
Shouldn't scare them too much.
You're an adult, so you should be able to handle this. If there is a war, North Korea will not survive that. That's quite clear. So for North Korea, if it knows it's going to be attacked, the famous bloody nose attack, they won't believe it's just a bloody nose attack. They will think, and they might be right, that this is aimed at wiping out the leadership. If they think they know it's coming, it would be wise for them to attack first. That would be the rational thing to do. And to go all out. To attack Seoul, to attack Tokyo, to attack Guam. Wherever there are American bases, Okinawa also. Preferably with nuclear weapons. Keep the the ICBMs with the smaller nuclear warheads to threaten America. So if you want to retaliate, fine, but we're going to send our rockets your way. Choose. Now I don't know what America would do, but that scenario would actually be the most rational scenario. So yes, this is. I don't think you shouldn't go, but you bring a Geiger counter. No, but seriously, you have to be aware, and you have to tell the embassies where you are, and take precautions. In all probability, nothing will happen, and even if something would happen, there would be a certain period in which you could buy a ticket and get the hell out of it.
Yeah. Okay. You still dare to go? Yep. Good. Please.
I actually had quite a similar question about the escalations between Trump calling Kim Jong-Un Rocket Man and back and forth. As you're the expert, how serious do you think that you basically answered already, but how serious do you think this might be? And is it just like showing who's boss, or?
Well, there's the whole ego thing with Trump probably, and him not really realizing what Twitter can do to people. North Korea, what I heard from North Koreans who were at high positions before they fled their own country is that they were afraid of Trump for one reason, that they couldn't predict what he would do. That he might be crazy enough to do something stupid. By now I think they found out that maybe he is that crazy and hard to predict, unpredictable, but he also has people around him, the generals, who know what war is and who will not easily start another war. So there's that, but the thing is, North Korea is extremely important in Trump's foreign policy. It's the main focal point. And if there isn't some kind of compromise found with South Korea, a common way forward, that's when I would start to worry. As long as Seoul and Washington are on the same page, I don't see Washington doing anything stupid. If Seoul is too nice to North Korea, and Washington is afraid it will lose its ally, that's when the chances for a bloody nose attack will be highest, probably. So that's the one thing you'd have to. There are two warning signs. One, the alliance between Seoul and Washington will fall apart. Two, Americans are starting to repatriate American families from South Korea. If that happens, leave with them. Pretend you're American.
Pretend you're an American. Yes. Okay.
Yeah, I was wondering, how do people leave North Korea? For example, the people you speak to, but also the pork story that she goes back and forth to China.
Yeah, good question.
Two different. That's a very good question. Two different things. If you really want to leave Korea forever, you've probably seen on the news, right? The soldiers who went right through the DMZ. That usually doesn't happen. If it happens, you usually end up killed. So that it happened twice this last year is incredible. Although one soldier arrived with 5 bullets in his body. What usually happens is, because the border between South and North Korea, it's impossible to cross. So you cross the border into China. And the more north you get, the easier it is. In the very north, the river, which is the boundary between North Korea and China, is as wide as this. So you can actually, you can jump over it. And if it's in winter, you can just walk over it. And even if there are border guards, you bribe them. It's the fourth law, right? Throw money at it, everything starts to move. So you basically need to have money. Then you go into China. It's impossible to go to the South Korean embassy or the South Korean consulate because the Chinese authorities discourage that, to put it very euphemistically. So what happens is that people, they really make an incredible journey. They go through North China and go all the way to South China, to Southeast Asia, to Laos, Vietnam, Thailand, Cambodia, and there they go to the South Korean embassies and ask for asylum, and then they are flown to South Korea. Wow. That's how it usually happens.
And people can only do that when they don't have family in North Korea.
They take their family.
They go with all family.
Sometimes what happens, they go without their family. It used to be the case that if people would find out that you were in South Korea, your family would have had it. But these days, it's a money-based economy. It's a dollar-based economy.
Okay.
It's incredible. But
Yeah.
so what happens now, and these are the directives from Pyongyang, you leave their families be because you know they're sending
They're
money
sending
back
money
home.
back to.
So every month you go, sorry, South Korean taxes.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's,
Incredible. I saw a lot of questions. I come to you. You had one?
Did you imply that North Korea is selling nuclear weapons?
I don't know whether they are, but given the opportunity, yes, that's definitely, yeah. Well, anybody who wants to buy it. Syria, one of the best friends of North Korea, they actually did sell their nuclear technology to Iran really, and then Iran, with money from Iran, a nuclear reactor was built in Syria in 2007. Which was promptly bombed out of existence by the Israeli Air Force. So it happened before. To give you, I don't want to rob you of your sleep tonight, but where do you think the leadership of Hezbollah trained? Pyongyang. Seriously, and this is not, Google it, so you'll know it to be true. North Korea may seem like a pariah state to us, and here it is in Europe, but it has many good friends. It has shown itself to be a very loyal friend to many Southern African regimes, for example, Mozambique, Zimbabwe, Namibia, Middle Eastern states, and a mortal enemy of Israel for some reason. So yes, will they sell their nuclear technology? If they can get away with it and they're paid enough, yes they will. I mean, they sold their, for example, their biological and chemical warfare abilities to Syria. The attacks by Assad on his own people, with chemical weapons, they're North Korean, made by North Koreans in chemical labs, built by North Koreans and manned by North Korean engineers until at least 2015. So I have no illusions whatsoever.
I think this was a clear answer to your question. Thank you. Please.
What do you think the biggest motivation for South Korea to reconcile with North Korea is? Because maybe to me it seems that they are a way more prosperous nation, so why would they want to do
Well,
that?
to be honest, your generation is not looking for unification. Because they look at North Korea and think, oh God, I mean, they made a mess out of it, they clean it up themselves. They have family in the genetic sense on the other side of the border, but they've never met those people. Their parents still have family there, and their grandparents certainly. Maybe even children, maybe even brothers or spouses or parents or sisters or whatever, but younger generation don't have it anymore. So the younger generation don't want unification, which is why this government really wants unification now, because if they don't do it now, it won't come. It won't happen. Which I think would be a very healthy thing for North Korea really to become a more nicer country, and if you reunification or not wouldn't really matter if you could just go there and talk to people. Wouldn't really matter if you'd be part of a different system, different state. That's not the situation. So there is no good reason to reunify on the in the short term, except for security. Oh, and there is this. If North and South Korea would unify in the long run, best case scenario, but hey, I'm an optimist. North Korea, unified Korea could become the second largest economy in the world. Yes, because look at the big companies in South Korea, Samsung. I mean, they challenge Apple, and they get away with it. And it's not the only big company. Look at the workforce in North Korea. There's a reason why they export that many people abroad, and why it's so desirable to have North Koreans working for you. And look at everything that's in the ground, in the earth, in North Korea. Mm-hmm. And then imagine what it would do to the price of a mobile phone if you could produce it in North Korea, put it on a train, and pick it up in Amsterdam. By iPhone. So there's that scenario.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Please.
I think that the general opinion is that North Korea is very controlling. And how do you as a researcher ensure that the info you get is real and not fake or created by them?
Yeah, no, that's very. That's a very good question. That's the biggest problem we have, I think, in our field, because most of my colleagues don't know Korean, which is, I find it mind-boggling. But and they rely on the English translations of North Korean sources, which you can do. But if those English translations are made in Pyongyang, I would say you have a bit of a methodological problem there. So first thing you have to do is to know Korean, cross-check your sources. And also talk to non-government sources, because one of the nicer side effects of corruption being so prevalent in North Korea is that you can buy information. We have, for example, although I'm told it's illegal to have it in the Netherlands, so I don't, but it's in South Korea, the entire municipal administration of Pyongyang on a USB stick, flash drive. It's an Excel file with 2.1 million entries. And it's very good for checking things out, I can tell you that. You have to be very creative and cross-check the stories of exiles with the stories of the government and the other sources. And even then, many times you will just have to be very honest and say, I don't know. This sounds plausible, it sounds reasonable, but in the end, can I check it? No. That happens a lot. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, another question?
You thought about how people that flee from North Korea said they were scared for the people in North Korea, but are they scared for what the North Korean people could do or what they could happen if the North Korean government would go down?
That's exactly what the elite is afraid of. When the Arab Spring was happening, there were, just one example, 300 North Koreans in Libya, right around the time when Gaddafi was toppled and was killed by some people. The North Korean government was so scared that this story would reach North Korea, it made a decision not to repatriate any North Koreans, and they left them there. And they, as far as I know, they died, or they may still be there, but they can't go back. They're dead afraid of stories of people rising up to kill their leaders, that they may get contaminated, and who knows, there might be an idea. Why don't we do that? So they're extremely afraid of that, and that's. There are a number of people who communicate with people outside of the country, members of the elite, the people who can travel to China, for example, and then email without too much problems. And the reasons for them to do it is to get the promise that if something happens, their families will be taken care of, will be rescued from the country, and they themselves will not be prosecuted. That's the main reason. And maybe it's best be likened with the regime thinks it's on a tiger and the tiger is running. What do you do when you're stuck on a running tiger, right? You can try and stop the tiger, and it will probably eat you. You can jump off, but it's a tiger, and they run at a fairly high speed, and you'll probably break your neck. So what do? You just sit and hope nothing happens, and that's what the North Korean government, the elite at the moment, does.
Yeah.
You said that basically one of the things that has to happen for North Korea to come in peace with the rest of the world is to drop their nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
But isn't that the only thing that keeps them alive at the moment?
It is.
It's the big trump card,
Yeah.
pun intended.
Yeah. No, that is exactly the problem. It is. It's the one thing that keeps them alive. And it's I think their reasoning is sound. By having nuclear weapons, they have the very fact that they have not been invaded by the United States, or there hasn't been a preemptive strike, is because they have nuclear weapons. In that sense, I agree with them, but it keeps them safe. They don't like the outcome, but yes, they can't give it up because it would be the end of them. Which is why I think we have a structural problem, we don't have a structural solution, which is not good.
Remco, in one of your articles you said that the North Koreans are very smart and strategic. planning. So they play chess on a very long scale, and Moon from South Korea, for instance, he is doing the sport diplomacy. Oh, well, you have the Olympic Games. Well, we do something with skating together. Could you comment a bit more? How do the North Koreans prepare their policies?
They started preparing for the Olympic Games once it was known South Korea would get them. That's 7 years ago or so.
Yes. Okay.
So coming to the table at the very latest moment was not because they decided to come to the table at the last moment,
no, exactly.
but because they knew that with Moon, they had somebody who really wanted them there, and the later they would come, the more they would be able to get, and they did. So I don't know. Well, no, it's
It's all thought out and planned. Yes. Okay. Yes.
Yes. How quick are the Koreas growing apart, and would that stand a problem for unification? Do you think?
Yeah. No, they have grown apart to an enormous degree. I mean, 70 years ago they were the same. But now these days, the biggest problem for the ice hockeyers in the team, they didn't understand each other, and they understand each other. I mean, the languages are the same. The grammar didn't really change in both countries. It's the words and the concepts behind it. It's the fact that in South Korea, just like in Dutch, you use English words all the time. In North Korea, you don't. And things like that, which makes it very difficult for North Koreans. Those North Koreans who flee to the south think they're going to a better version of North Korea, in which everybody will want them. What happens when they arrive is that nobody likes them because they're from a different country, they don't really speak language like they should, they're lazy, they hit their women, these are the prejudices that every minority has to face them. But in South Korea it's the North Koreans who face them, which means that the suicide rate in South Korea is the highest of all OECD countries in the world. The suicide rate among North Koreans in South Korea is 5 times higher than that. And that's the extent to which North and South Korea have grown apart. So it's a huge gap these days.
Well, vraag? Yeah. Okay.
I was thinking, what about the hacking of North Korea? Is it really like that much of a threat as everybody tried to present it to be?
Yeah, there's a lot of hype going on with the hacking. But I just wrote a chapter, I've just finished a book on this, on North Korea in general, and one chapter is about hacking. As it turns out, they started forming their first hacking training institutes in the 80s, that early. So people, the most promising students, well, in terms of mathematical abilities and stuff, are sent to special schools. So it is true. There are enough people who left the country who can tell us about this. They seem to be extremely good, but it's hacking, so you never know for sure, right? Also because the hacking doesn't happen from North Korea. It usually happens from China, Cambodia, Vietnam. Well, for all I know, it may happen from Enschede, wherever North Koreans can be in peace and where good internet connections. That's basically what you need. And it's an easy way to make money. At least it's seen like one is strategic. If a war would come, nuclear weapons aren't going to cut it. We need to be able to what's the word I'm looking for? To make sure Seoul or South Korea stops functioning. And South Korea is an extremely connected society. So if the internet goes down there, you'll have instant chaos. If the same happens in North Korea, who cares? Nobody has internet anyway. So, yeah. But it seems to be at a fairly sophisticated level. Yeah.
Okay. Unfortunately, we have to round off, but you can ask your question after we round it off, because Remco, I have to go back to Leiden by train also. So, Remco, I would like to thank you very much for your insights, sharing with us about North Korea.
My pleasure.
I think it was very interesting what you said about North Korea, that actually you can't see it as a communist state, but you should see it as a conglomerate of capitalist companies, which gives a complete different dynamic to understand how the country works and how the money has to flow in. We have to remember that a North Korean can't say no to anyone. That's a very sad thing, that you have unemployment police. Actually, that's something I've never heard of, but it exists. And we know the fourth law of Newton has been invented in North Korea. Throw money at it and it will start moving. Remco Breuker, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.